And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Tahseen Shabab, who's the CEO and co-founder of Penfield. Tahseen, thank you very much for joining me today. Much appreciated.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me here.
And we have such an exciting topic today. Bias and noise leads to human error in security operations centers. And we're going to talk about that and the overall bias that we have even in generating algorithms that supposed to automate this particular function. But before we get started, so maybe for people who are not familiar with Penfield specifically, just walk us through the process of creating the company. You saw a gap. You were but still is a practitioner in cybersecurity, and you saw gaps when you were working at different areas and decided to not just to wait for someone to solve the problem, but decided to solve it on your own. So maybe we can just jump into that before we get started.
Thank you, David. So I can introduce myself. I'm Tahseen. I'm one of the co-founders at Penfield.AI. I've graduated from the University of Waterloo in electrical engineering, and since then I've been in cybersecurity for the past 8 years. So I've been a cybersecurity consultant for companies such as IBM, for a top 5 Canadian bank, a Fortune 60 telco in the US, and more. And the reason we started the company is as follows. Around 2016, there was a huge notion amongst cybersecurity experts that AI will automate everything, but the reality was otherwise. AI or playbooks were automating the simple static processes while the complex attacks required human intervention. So the question remained, how do we augment human analyst capabilities? So around 2017, left our consulting careers in cyber and started doing research with 3 professors out of the University of Waterloo. And after 2 years of research, we came up with an interesting offering. So we're championing human-machine intelligence within cybersecurity. We're the first to model the skill sets of cybersecurity analysts and their processes in real time. This enables us to perform various decisions to improve the speed and accuracy of cyber attack resolution. And through that journey, we have learned several things, and I'm happy to share some insights.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting, when people say AI, so there's always this like, is it really AI? Because artificial intelligence is, I guess the definition would be to be self-aware, right? And we still don't really have that as of yet, at least not that I know of. But there's a lot of machine learning, aspect of AI, and then the ability to learn from iterative operations on data, right? So maybe we'll jump into that. But before we do that, the promise, as you mentioned, the promise of automation has been around for a long time. As you mentioned, this is not new, and yet automation is very limited, especially when we talk about cybersecurity. What are kind of the main pillars of why that is? I mean, we have enough data sets, right? We talk about in order for you to be able to operate on and have a machine learn from, you have to have large enough data sets. So we don't have that problem. And we have enough use cases, right? Because that's something that we can, grab, and so we have kind of fundamentally we have everything we need to be able to run effective algorithms. So why are we still in kind of the same boat we were back in 2016, as you mentioned?
David, that's a great question. So as per recent research by Palo Alto Networks, apparently only 15% of sophisticated cyber operations centers are using SOAR tools or cyber automation tools. So there's definitely a gap. And so from our understanding, the reason is as follows. So when we look at machine learning and some great use cases of machine learning, such as image recognition, the idea here is the underlying statistical distribution of data remains static. So for instance, an image of a cat would likely be the image of a cat 100 years down the line, as the pattern should be quite the same. However, when we look at cybersecurity, it's a different field. So cybersecurity is a dynamic field where everything keeps on changing. Your attack patterns keep on changing as hackers always look for the path of least resistance. Our network keeps on changing as we onboard new technology. Our user behavior changes as we grow our business. So again, it's a dynamic field. Furthermore, it's an adversarial university or field.
Tahseen, how dynamic is it? When you mentioned, I love this example of you mentioned that the image of a cat does not really change over a period of 100 years, but how fast paced is the change of attacks on, for example, like a large enterprise? How quickly are those things change for somebody that comes over and has that data?
So that's a great question. So in our case, I think it's a factor of three things. It's the factor of your network patterns keep on changing. So what is the baseline? An example would be within, for instance, cloud. You're always on board. I mean, cloud technology is evolving extremely fast. Next would be hackers. Hackers are always looking for the path of least resistance. And when we're looking at sophisticated hackers, they're always in once they get a foothold into a customer's environment, they'll tinker around. They'll try to figure out a way where they can cater their maneuvers based on what the base, would be quite close to the baseline of the existing organization. So these become quite hard. So I would say it's more of a real-time environment where once a hacker gets a foothold, and if it's a sophisticated hacker, they'll study the customer's environment and they'll try to figure out a loopholes.
Now, things have really changed as well, like in terms of the vulnerability landscape, right? We can see that it's almost an ever-going newscast, right? Or like, the Log4j, the supply chain vulnerability. There's just it's an ever-changing landscape of vulnerabilities. And as you mentioned, the tools as well have been released. So at one time we see like, okay, there's a bunch of NSA, released tools. There's a bunch of scripts available out there, and so those are also things have changed dramatically over a period of time, right? So how did you? So you mentioned these are kind of the pillars of why things are so difficult to model, right? So how do you? So that was a big problem, right? So you decided to go after a very, very big problem, and you said it took about 2 years. So what was the kind of the aha moment after 2 years, since you were involved in that research?
So that's a good point. So when we first started the research, we were a bit naive. Initially, the idea was we can learn from analyst intuition. This was in 2017, and the thing is, I mean, it's easy to prove certain models in a lab environment, but once you deploy in a real world setting, it's a different beast. So in a lab environment, I was able to demonstrate strong efficacy just by learning from analyst feedback. But then the idea was in early 2018, we realized that human analysts make mistakes, and analysts make mistakes due to a number of reasons, which include skill gaps, lack of contextual awareness, stress, fatigue, and more. So in essence, you can't really directly learn from analysts' feedback because those data sets tend to get quite noisy. So that was a big challenge for us, which is why we partnered with Dr. Hassan Khan, who's our co-founder and chief scientist, Professor Kate Larson from Waterloo, and more. And our idea was, all right, how do we model the skill sets of analysts? How do we know which actions are right and which are not? And the idea was once we figured that out, we would be able to learn from analyst feedback. But once we started testing the market, a lot of the players at the large banks mentioned, false positive reduction is great. A lot of people are doing it, but Tahseen, did you mention you can actually model the skill sets and surface that on a UI? That's something you would definitely pay for. And based on that feedback, we really focused it on modeling the skill sets of analysts and the proceeds they take. And once we figured that out, what we realized is we built an online learning model. So every time an analyst resolves an incident, we can immediately learn from their feedback, which is a form of reinforcement learning, which in essence is AI. So we have figured out a mechanism to identify the skill sets of the analyst and the state of the analyst. So we realized even within 10 minutes, the skill set of an analyst could change due to a factor such as short-term memory. For instance, if I'm an analyst and if I just solve a phishing incident 3 minutes back, and after 3 minutes, if I receive a similar iteration of the same problem, I can solve that problem with a fraction of the time. So it is a real-time problem. And these are things we can model, and based on that, we can perform actions to improve the efficacy of the analyst and also ensure we minimize cognitive workload.
And it's amazing because I'm sure that the problem you're trying to solve, it can be applied everywhere, right? So, we as humans, we make decisions, on various different things, even on a day-to-day basis. And it's amazing to me that you mentioned that you can make the same decision in very short intervals, but you have an external factor or even an internal factor that's outside of your control, like fatigue, for example, that will impact And so how did you manage to distill, all that noise? Like if you don't, yeah, and I'm sure you're very technical. Maybe you can kind of distill it down for us. How did you manage to kind of figure out what is the kind of the clean, clean data, and then the rest will be, kind of the noise you have to, factor in?
So that's a great question, David. Our professors and I focus on doing research for a couple of years, and what we figured out is the following. So what we realized is, first, how do you model skill sets, right? What is right? And so we figured out a mechanism to do that, which is primarily based on speed and accuracy. So what we realized, the analyst who's fastest and most accurate at solving a problem is the best analyst. And that's how we would rank processes they take as well. But then we realized that this is a real-time problem, and there are a number of other factors which can impact the speed and accuracy, which includes the short-term memory of the analyst. When was the last time this analyst solved a similar problem? It also is dependent on the experience of the analyst, the workload of the analyst, if the analyst is stressed or not, and many various other factors. So we figured that out. And now the question remains, okay, speed, we understand. We know when an analyst starts a problem and stops a problem. That's easy to calculate. But what about accuracy? And after our research, we realized that we can identify accuracy by modeling the processes of the analyst, because cybersecurity is an interesting field. So there are different types of decisions. One is a decision which can be verified. For instance, if you're trying to forecast weather, right? I can predict, if we predict that, okay, tomorrow it's going to be 10 degrees Celsius, that this is something we can validate. We can make the prediction and wait a day and then do a comparison between what we've predicted versus
and by the way,
the actual.
see, that's another area of real problem where they're always wrong. Nobody. This is like the only job I think you can just predict and then be wrong and still have the job the next day and do that over and over again. So it's funny you mentioned the weather, but yeah, you're absolutely correct. All you have to do is wait, and then the result will present itself. Right, so it's not the case with cybersecurity, right?
Exactly. So now, so there's a lack of ground truth. So now the problem becomes, how do you validate if something is right or wrong? And then another way of doing it is actually focusing on the process. When we look at the process of a novel attack and we compare it with similar process which have been done in the past, all of a sudden you can look at deviances from the norm, which can be potential mistakes. So now you can narrow down the potential mistake and pass it on to a QA analyst or a more experienced analyst for review. So that's something we've figured out. But it's funny how just last year, Daniel Kahneman in his new book, Noise, talks about something quite similar, where he also mentions, based on his research, looking at process deviance is a great mechanism to identify accuracy as it pertains to human judgment.
In that book specifically, how do they define the kind of the noise to to actual data ratio? Like, what is the element that they found? Like, if you have the cliff notes in terms of what was the kind of the underlying reasoning for the research, what was that?
Yes, that's a great question. Based on Daniel Kahneman's research, Daniel mentions error is a function of bias as well as noise. Bias can come from various elements, cognitive bias and more, but the focus of the book is actually noise. So what is noise? As per Daniel Kahneman, noise is due to several reasons, including skill gaps, as well as stress and fatigue. And
it's amazing that, for once, I think, and this is what's unique about this particular book, is that they're focusing on the noise as opposed to the actual data, which is a very, very different different approach. So how do you make sure that since we have inherent bias in terms of how we even design these algorithms to find out what the process is, how do you prevent that from affecting the results and make sure that you account for that?
So that's a great question, David. Of course, when machine learning models or artificial intelligence is modeling humans, it's something we definitely want to be, of course, very careful about. Now, there have been cases, I mean, where algorithms were built which were not fair. I can share one example. Around 2018, there was a story that Amazon was building a machine learning model to rank resumes, and then what the researchers realized was there was an inherent bias not due to how engineers build the models, it's just due to the data which was used, in which case there was a gender bias, which was quite unfortunate. Of course, Amazon has addressed that. So that's something we definitely want to keep in mind. One train of thought is, all right, if a model is susceptible to bias, can we control the data the model uses to learn as a mechanism to minimize bias? For instance, if you want to minimize bias around age, gender, and other elements, let's not even feed these data points, right? But then researchers realize another element. Many times there's correlation between different data points. An example would be maybe if you, a certain postal code might be a good indication of someone's ethnicity. So these are things we want to be very mindful of. In our case, of course, we only take into account data pertaining to actions taken by human analysts on tools. We don't even take into account education, as that can have bias as well.
So talk to me, how did you apply that in your own, in Penfield, in the algorithms? And I'm assuming this is an ongoing problem you're solving right now, and you've already proven that Penfield has the ability to, as you mentioned, to model, and then be able to distill through the noise and make recommendations in terms of how to better do the job of these analysts, and reducing the time to resolution, right? I mean, that's the ultimate goal is for this tool is to apply all those lessons learned, the collective lessons learned, into one platform that allows you to basically reduce the time it takes, right? So how did you solve that problem? Because again, this is a big problem, and I'm assuming that as always with companies that are releasing product, there was the minimum viable product where you were ashamed to release it. I hope because that's when it's being released on time. You don't wait, and then you were iteratively making it better. So what was it kind of the process for you to make it better, and how did you know that it was very effective, that you managed to make an impact in terms of the problem solved?
Absolutely. So that's a good question. So what we notice in the industry is as follows. Today, analysts are graded based on speed as well as frequency. So if I'm an analyst, if I'm solving a problem fast, I'm considered good as per my employer. However, the challenge is analysts were not rewarded for doing a diligent test. So imagine you're getting an attack, which is a new attack, right? I mean, if I'm a responsible analyst, I would like to do my diligence, really understand the problem. But if it takes longer, all of a sudden I'm penalized by my employer. So that was one challenge faced by human analysts. So with Penfield, what we have done is we have included.
By the way, let's just pause there for a second, because I want to put a pin on that specifically. So just to kind of describe the problem you just mentioned in layman terms, there are, in my own words, so it'd be easier for for people to understand this. So as you mentioned, analysts are being measured by, specifically how fast they solve a problem. And I'm assuming that because those matrices are specifically done because they can see, okay, how much it costs us to run the SOC, and how many cases do we solve, right? So kind of there's those type of elements. But then if an analyst, if they've seen something, 5-10 times, of course they're going to be more effective, quote unquote, because they've seen that before. But if it's a new issue or something that they've never seen before, it would take them a little longer, but they get penalized because the input was different, because they've never seen that before. So that is a big problem, because again, they get penalized. And so what would be if I was sitting in an analyst in a SOC and I know that I've been monitored a certain way, I would try to almost ignore the fact that it's new and trying to apply whatever I already know and get this solved as quickly as possible, so I look better to my employers, right? So that's something you've seen before.
Which is the unfortunate situation, because from our experience, analysts want to do a good job. Like they want to focus on new tasks. No one wants to solve the same problem over and over again. So they want challenging problems, but then again, they're penalized based on the system, based on how you're looking at data from, say, a ticketing tool and getting those metrics out of it, which is why we've introduced the accuracy factor. So an analyst who's fastest and most accurate, because certain problems might be harder to solve. And based on our experience, companies care about accuracy as well, but it's just that as of today, there was no other mechanism to perform that calculation, as companies were reliant on random spot checks. So many times mistakes were slipping through the cracks. But we introduced the speed as well as accuracy component. However, to address your prior question, we learned a number of things. So in our case, different companies can, so when it comes to algorithmic fairness, one element is what data do you feed in, then another element is what are you trying to optimize? Are you trying to optimize speed, accuracy, or are we trying to reduce cognitive workload of analysts? Are we trying to improve the well-being of analysts? Are we trying to evenly distribute workload across the SOC? Are we trying to equally distribute skill sets across the board, where many times we notice that there could be skill silos, a few analysts could retain most of the knowledge. Now, an AI algorithm, in our case, for us, what we could do is we could look at, okay, these are the best traits of the best analysts. Can we cross-train these traits to other analysts to gradually improve their efficacy over time? So these are some of the elements which we have taken into account as well, and we also enable our users to.
And then, Tahseen, I'm assuming that if I run a SOC, especially for an MSSP, for example, right? All I care, because I have to provide the output, kind of report on a month basis, right? Saying, hey, Mr. Customer, you pay me X dollars for this month, and look, I've solved, I've solved this, 500 cases. So that and typically, and it's interesting that you mentioned that typically the quality of it was, I guess it's assumed that you have a certain baseline of quality because assume that it's being solved. So the quality was not something that was factored in, right? Is that correct? Not necessarily in the past.
So that's a good point. We have been noticing a shift in the industry as we work with the MSSPs, the MDRs. What we've noticed is increasingly there's a larger appetite from an MSSP's end customer to get more visibility into the work. We've noticed this trend where MSSPs mentioned their customers shared that, hey, analysts, hey, MSSP, how do we know if you're actually following the right processes which are applicable to my company? And this is where what we've noticed is with Penfield, we can model the processes taken by analysts. We can add an accuracy factor, which is something our customers are willing to share to their end customers to demonstrate that they're doing a diligent job. It also kind of diversifies or differentiates an MSSP service from the other players who are trying to offer something similar.
So it sounds great. So tell me what the impact is. So it's almost like, to me, if I listen to you and it seems like that if they don't have Penfield, they're like, running blind in terms of what it is that they're doing. They're just seeing a fraction of the reporting that they should have for the SOC. And it's amazing to me because they spend so much money and effort and time, training these folks, the analysts, and running the SOC, which is it's just a costly, endeavor. I mean, that's why a lot of companies don't, aside from I would say Fortune 500, do not, attempt to run a SOC on their own, but they outsource that. So that's why one of the fastest growing segments in the industry is the MSPs and MSSPs. But they're running blind. They're having, because they only see a fraction of the data. In maybe after they install Penfield and start using it, what happened then? Tell me like a reaction of, the results, maybe the first after running it for a few weeks. What does the customer say? What is their reaction? What are kind of the outcome? Maybe like talk to me about specific outcome. What happens after the install and start using it?
Sounds brilliant, David. So I'll kick things off by stating, I think the reason why we're in this phase in the industry is because around 2016, the industry was promising that AI will automate everything. So the notion was, let's bring humans out of the loop. But unfortunately, that hasn't panned out. So now we're in this situation. So what we do is, what we've noticed is we can first, like some of the hallmark capabilities for us would be, one is we can improve the efficacy of the SOC, so we can free up analyst time to perform high leverage tasks. But another element would be we can generate the skill sets of the workforce across the board, so we can look at skill gaps. And whenever we share these to SOC analysts and their managers, the idea becomes, okay, how do we train our analysts, right? Because analysts want to become better, and the idea becomes, can we assign training material to analysts in a strategic manner? So that's one element. Also, the accuracy factor is quite
And Tahseen,
interesting.
I'll ask about this. Like, so what? So I'm hearing, actually, what I'm hearing specifically is that I can save money. I can save money on different ways. One is now my analyst can do more, right? So I can potentially increase the capacity of my SOC without actually making any changes, just by using Penfield. And then you mentioned be able to train the analysts and have them become better. That will also save me money by several factors, in fact, because now I'm going to have a happier analyst because they're like now increasing their, the skill set. And also the number one thing that right now everybody's saying is the skill gap, because they're not able to get the right, talent into these SOCs. So what I'm hearing when I'm asking myself, like, so what, is like what you just mentioned translate to directly into the bottom line. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off in that when you mentioned this specifically, the kind of the benefits associated with installing the system.
Absolutely. So in addition to the like for instance reducing costs, we can enable companies to onboard new business while retaining the same workforce. Next would be also we can improve the quality of work of analysts by cross training them with the best practices of the best analysts. So at the end of the day, you have a more cohesive output which can be shared to your, say for an MSSP, which could be shared to their end customers in the form of reporting and analysis and the processes which are being leveraged. Another element for us would, of course, be the responsible automation. What we noticed is MSSP's customers might be paying them a premium for white glove service, but if companies start to automate the simple static process without providing a reasoning behind why that automation took place, all of a sudden there's a lack of trust. So is there a mechanism to surface the repetitive process which can be automated while sharing why it was being automated in the first place? So there are mechanisms to do that as well. And this is something we have noticed has been resonating with our customers. And finally, I would also like to touch on the fact that what about analyst churn? When your best analysts leave, they do leave with their rich tribal knowledge with them. So is there a mechanism for us to retain that knowledge and grade that knowledge and leverage that to train newer analysts so that you can shorten their onboarding time? And that's something we can do as well.
So you solve major problems for the SOC operators, in terms of training, in terms of skill gap, in terms of efficiency. And I'm assuming that you have you created some ROI calculators, because that's probably something that, at the end of the day, it's like, okay, we're going to pay X dollars to Penfield to run this software. We're going to save, X, multiple, in terms of like the cost associated with running the SOC. So on average, on top of your mind, and I it's okay, this conversation is unscripted. What are kind of the cost analysis benefits for cost saving here, like just in your mind?
So that's a good question. So for instance, like there are different ways to perform this calculation. One would be the following. Usually, as part of our onboarding process, we can analyze 3 weeks to 2 months worth of data and share some KPIs for our customers even before we go live. So for instance, if we can demonstrate if we can demonstrate a 25% improvement in mean time to resolve incident, which we have already done in the past multiple times, what we could that 25% reduction means the customer can potentially onboard more business by retaining the same workforce. And that 25% is a fraction of the amount the value of the workforce which you can retain. So that's one mechanism of performing that.
And to seem like just again and I know a lot of stuff you say it's kind of trivial too, because you are in this all the time. But if I hear it the first time, I have to re-ask that question, because it's not trivial if I hear that. So you mentioned that you have the ability to look at historical data, right?
Yes.
And then basically import it into the platform and allow for a certain type of cost benefit calculation just from looking at historical data. And then get a feel of what it would do for that particular customer. Is that true? How's that happening today?
Precisely. So what we do is as part of our onboarding process, we tend to take a couple of days to offline to analyze historic data from the customer. And this gives us an understanding of what the value of Penfield would be even before we perform a deployment. Now, we've already demonstrated around 25% improvement in between 25 to up to a 38% improvement in mean time to resolve incidents, which also means we can.
Tahseen, where do you grab that data from? Is that where's that coming from? And then how would you be best prepare for that? So let's say somebody's listening to this and say, hey, this I would love to get this this ROI calculation for my business. What do I need? For to have all my ducks in a row when I call Penfield and ask to test it out.
So that's a good question. So typically so Penfield integrates with different tools used within the SOC, including your SIM tools, SOAR tools, as well as ticketing tools. So in general, we perform deployments within our customers' private cloud instance. So we are completely based on top of Kubernetes. So typically we request access to the core tools used within the SOC. This could be via existing APIs. Second, we also share some commands which the customers can leverage in order to provision servers on their private cloud instance. And that's all we need.
So and Tahseen, this is great because no data leaves their organization as well, because I'm assuming that, since we're all the cybersecurity people, don't want their SOC data being broadcast anywhere. So that's interesting. So you mentioned it's all Kubernetes based, so you can deploy this in the private cloud. How intricate or how involved is that process? Let's say somebody said, "This is great. I would love to do it." How long does that take to deploy something like that? Siphon, quote unquote, connect, get the access to all that data and run the operation. How long does that take?
So that's a good question. So today it takes us 8 hours to perform an installation, as long as the customers have all the API keys and access available, because we already have scripts which can perform the deployments across the customer's private cloud instance. So that's number one. Number two is once that's done, we start ingesting data and we do our diligence on data. So in our case, we typically take around 2 weeks to do our diligence on our customers' offline data. And at that time, we also shared those expected value of Penfield. We shared that, based on your data, we can easily demonstrate between 25 to up to 38% improvement in mean time to resolve incidents. We also share some other KPIs around skill set visualization, improving accuracy of incident resolution, and more. And once that's done, we're ready to go live. But we noticed of course, there's some change management involved as well. So initially, we go live by performing recommendations of actions. We don't start performing actions, but we recommend actions just so that analysts have some time to understand the changes and for us to manage the change management process upon which we can go live.
And Tahseen, it's not like you install this and there's mass layoff of analysts, right? It's just it is just getting better at what they do, and now you can basically process additional incidents, right? At kind of the same, and then I'm assuming the analysts actually have a little bit more time even to spend, because again, I'm assuming that a lot of these SOCs run very thin, like in terms of that, especially if it's 24/7. They have a certain number of analysts for every hour, and so all of a sudden, I'm assuming that the kind of almost the instant impact of this platform is that they have more time to do the tasks that they had to do, right? So that's the kind of the initial impact. So they don't start laying off 25% of the workforce, right?
So that's a good point, David. Our mission is to elevate human potential to address sophisticated cyber attacks. So we need humans, and from our understanding, the industries, people want more analysts. So the idea is there's an acute shortage of skilled analysts. So now the challenge becomes, how do we quickly upskill analysts? And how do we ensure they're competitive in the market? And the whole premise of human machine intelligence is as follows. But the human machine intelligence ties people, processes, and technology. And what we notice is with people, strong people along with strong processes can outmaneuver even sophisticated computers. So it's not just computers, it's a combination of computers, people, and process, and that's where human machine intelligence comes into play. We need all factors.
So to see I'm assuming that 2025 we'll have a implant available for certain analysts to have it completely in the back of their head for like a personal use Penfield in case they wanted to complete the outsourced function, or is that not coming? Well, I think uh, I think there's some already like experiments. I think with the human computer interaction, right? So actual, I think Elon Musk has a company that does some connection with already like successful trials as well. So maybe there's something if instead of Kubernetes, we'll have like a personal computer use to implement. But all joking aside, what's next for Penfield? You've done phenomenally well. These numbers again. It doesn't sound like a lot. I mean, at least for layman terms, 25 to like 35 or 38%, but it is tremendous significance. I know that the devil's in details, but even like a marginal like 2-3% in improvement can translate to hundreds of millions of dollars on SOC operation, depending on what the size of the SOC is and what the complexities are. But what's next? I'm assuming that you're running forward. You're going to create additional improvements. What are kind of if you can share kind of the roadmap in terms of what else is coming down the pipe?
So that's a good question. Actually, our company has grown significantly over the past few months. Just this year alone, so now it's March 15, we've increased our headcount by over 100%. So our company is growing fast. In addition to your point around roadmap, we do have a land and expand strategy where first we're deploying Penfield across the blue teams within a SOC, but we do have applications across other use cases such as fraud detection, threat hunting, red team, network operations centers, and more. And we are gradually looking to perform deployments across these use cases as well.
And so if somebody wanted to try it out, we already talked about the processes of getting it. And I love the fact that you can run it on historical data without actually impacting the system whatsoever. Because that's a lot of times, people are afraid that, because the SOC is running 24/7 and they don't want to quote unquote interfere with the process and so on. So there's ability to run this. What's the easiest way for people to start, even small, and maybe reach out to you? What's the easiest way for them to do that?
Absolutely. So we can definitely schedule a demo of Penfield and discuss how we perform deployment. So if anyone's interested, please feel free to reach out at Tahseen at Penfield.AI. So we would be happy to schedule a demo. And to David's point, initially we do an offline analysis. So we run Penfield in read-only mode to share some KPIs. And then we start, once we've built that trust, we go live where we train every time an analyst resolves an incident. So it's an online learning model, and we can further improve our efficacy in that manner.
And it would be very applicable for both, if you're running a SOC as a MSSP to multiple tenants, right? Or if you're an enterprise just running a SOC for your own, right? It would be applicable for both, right?
Precisely, it would be applicable for both parties.
Okay, good. So, I can't wait to hear more about the kind of the next iteration of Penfield. And it's what's amazing is, as you mentioned, their ability to apply this technology to other areas of not just in cybersecurity, but I'm assuming in any decision-making type of processes. So, you never know where Penfield is going to end up, and maybe healthcare and somebody's going to take that platform and apply that to some other area. So, and we're all going to benefit from that. So, and then it was amazing journey, like to from a research. A research project to, in actuality, to run this as a business and start, reaching out. It's amazing to me how many, how many research projects are there that never see the light of day. And then, there's no one who benefits aside from, I guess you get your PhD or you become a professor in some university, but in actuality, there's very few people that benefit from it. So it's kudos to you for taking that plunge and making a decision to apply this in the real world. But until then, Tahseen, thank you very much for joining me today. Much appreciated. And I encourage anybody who hasn't seen Penfield before and who wants to know more to reach out. Sounds like a real problem to get solved. And I don't know if Tahseen, is there anybody else in the industry that currently doing this, was doing something similar?
So that's funny. Actually, it's funny how when we raised our seed round of investment, which was around a year back, the companies which we targeted could be potential competitors are actually now some of our biggest partners. We are championing human machine intelligence in cybersecurity. In fact, the UN recently recognized Penfield as a top 100 AI initiative as it pertains to their SDG sustainable development goals. So even the UN is promoting us. In summary, we are a very unique offering in the market.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think these quote unquote, as you mentioned, potential competitors, I think that they were smarter to partner as opposed to trying to create something like that on your own. I think that the group of engineers and people that are currently as part of Penfield, they're hard to replicate. So it's not a surprise to me that these competitors decided to partner instead. But Tahseen, thank you very much. And again, thank you everyone for joining. Much appreciate. Looking forward to seeing you at the next episode. And until then, be safe online as well as offline. Thanks, Tahseen, for joining.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your time.
Take care.